Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku fought a world without heroes. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first sound of the day was the voice of God. It was a calm baritone, oozing a paternalistic benevolence that curdled the stomach. It echoed from the public address speakers embedded in the ceiling of the prefabricated housing block. The same voice that whispered from every screen and billboard in the sanctuary. Good morning, citizens. The time is 6 o'clock. Another safe and prosperous day dawns under the watchful protection of our founder. Let us embrace our roles, contribute to the collective, and remember the peace he has gifted us. Izuku Midoriya didn't move. He lay on the thin mattress, a lumpy rectangle of recycled foam on the cold floor of his one-room apartment. He stared at the gray ceiling, tracing the water stains that looked like a map of a forgotten country. 7 years? 7 years of waking up to that voice. 7 years of this hollow peace, bought at the cost of everything he had ever loved. At 23, Izuku looked like a wraith. The boy who had been a firework of earnest energy was now a creature of shadow and bone. His once wild green hair was now lank and dark, cut short and practical. His face was all sharp angles and hollows, his freckles like scattered ash on pale skin. A web of faint scars climbed from his right collarbone up his neck, a permanent reminder of a fight he'd long since lost. But the most telling change was in his eyes. The vibrant, analytical green was now muted, clouded with a weariness that went soul deep. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the end of the world and had been forced to live in its ruins. He pushed himself up, his joints protesting with a series of quiet clicks. The room was Spartan. A mattress, a small food prep station, a toilet and shower head in a grimy stall. No pictures. No mementos. Nothing that spoke of a life before this one. To have such things was to invite questions, and questions invited scrutiny. Scrutiny, in the sanctuary, was a death sentence. He shuffled to the prep station and dispensed a cup of lukewarm, recycled water. He squeezed a tube of gray nutrient paste onto a flimsy wafer. Breakfast. It tasted of nothing, but it was fuel. As he ate, his gaze drifted to his right wrist. Clasped around it was a mandatory quirk suppression cuff. It was a thick band of black metal and polymer, with a single, unblinking red light. According to his official registration, Izuku Midoriya possessed a minor telekinetic quirk, classified as Level 2, potentially disruptive. The cuff dampened it to an unusable state, a precaution applied to millions. It was a lie. The greatest, most dangerous lie of his life. The cuff did nothing. It was a dummy, a shell he'd paid a fortune for on the black market, its electronics expertly fried and rewired to display a constant, reassuring red light. Beneath it, sleeping fitfully, was a god. A cataclysm. The smoldering embers of 9 lives and the collective power of one for all. It was a secret he'd guarded with every fiber of his being, a weight so immense it had crushed the boy he used to be, leaving this hollow man in his place. He finished his breakfast and dressed for work. A drab, gray jumpsuit, patched at the elbows and knees. Heavy-soled work boots. He pulled on a pair of thick gloves and a respirator mask, standard gear for his profession. He was a scrap hauler. A junkman. He sifted through the city's refuse, sorting recyclable metals and plastics from the mountains of debris that still choked the city's old districts. It was a fitting job for a ghost, picking through the bones of a dead world. Before leaving, he paused at the door, a ritual of pure, paranoid habit. He closed his eyes, took a shallow breath, and recited the mantra that had kept him alive. Be small. Be quiet. Be invisible. You are no one. You are nothing. He opened the door and stepped out into the world All for One had made. The city once known as Muzidafu was now the Sanctuary, Central District 1. The new name was a cruel joke. The architecture was a jarring mix of old and new. The familiar, pre-war buildings, many still scarred from the final battles, were dwarfed by monolithic, brutalist structures of dark metal and concrete that had been erected with impossible speed. These were the administrative centers, the warden barracks, the propaganda hubs. At the city's heart, visible from almost anywhere, was the spire, a needle of polished black obsidian that clawed at the sky. It was from there that All for One ruled, a dark god on his throne. Giant holoscreens were plastered on the sides of these new buildings, displaying a constant, looping feed. Sometimes it was all for one's face, serene and smiling. Sometimes it was footage of smiling citizens receiving their nutrient rations. Other times, it was stark, black and white warnings about the age of chaos that had preceded his unity. The images were always of heroes, twisted and distorted by propaganda. All Might, his smile made manic and terrifying. Endeavor wreathed in flames that burned homes, not villains. The message was clear: heroes were the disease. All for One was the cure. The streets were clean, orderly, and joyless. People moved with a uniform, shuffling gait, their heads down, their shoulders hunched. Eye contact was a currency no one could afford to spend. Overseeing it all were the wardens. They were AFO's enforcers, a legion of sanctioned quirk users clad in intimidating black and white armor. They patrolled in pairs, their faces hidden behind impassive helmets. Izuku saw a pair now, their boots echoing with unnerving synchronicity. One had arms that could elongate into sharp, metallic blades. The other's hands glowed with a faint kinetic energy. They were the shepherds, and everyone else was the flock. Izuku kept his head down, the respirator hiding most of his face. He joined the river of gray-clad workers flowing toward the industrial zones. He was just another drop of water, insignificant and unnoticeable. That was the goal. His work zone was Sector Gamma 7, what used to be the commercial heart of the city near the old shopping mall. Now, it was a sprawling, mountainous landfill. Cranes and maglifters, operated by those with sanctioned industrial quirks, moved the larger pieces of debris. The haulers, the bottom feeders like Izuku, swarmed over the piles with magnetic rakes and sensor wands, sorting the valuable scraps. His boss, a gruff man named Kaido with a quirk that let him perfectly assess the metallic composition of any object he touched, grunted as Izuku clocked in. Midoriya. You're on the east pile today. They uncovered a section of the old Takoba district. Full of pre-war electronics. High-grade copper and silver if you're lucky. Don't slack. Yes, sir, Izuku mumbled, his voice muffled by the mask. He trudged toward the designated pile, a man-made mountain of shattered concrete, twisted rebar, and the fossilized remains of 1,000 lives. For hours, he worked in a mindless rhythm. Rake, sort, deposit. The sun, hazed by pollution, beat down on his back. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of rust and decay. It was here, in the graveyard of his past, that the ghosts came for him. His rake scraped against something small and plastic. He picked it up. It was a child's toy, a cheap action figure. Half of it was melted, the colors faded, but it was still recognizable. The stupidly heroic V-shaped hair, the signature grin. All Might. Izuku's breath hitched. His gloved fingers tightened around the broken plastic. For a moment, he wasn't standing in a landfill. He was standing in a field of fire. The scream of twisting metal. The smell of burning flesh. Shoto's left side, a curtain of ice, shattering into a million pieces. Uraraka, floating helplessly, a black tendril piercing through her suit. Ida's engine sputtering, failing, as he pushed a group of civilians out of a collapsing building's path. He saw Bakugo, his childhood friend, his rival, a blazing comet of defiant rage, launching himself at All for One, a final, desperate gambit. The explosion had been blinding. When the light faded, Kaken was just gone. Not a body. Not a trace. Just gone. And All Might. He saw All Might, skeletal and broken, standing between him and All for One. The final embers of One for All burning out in a desperate, futile shield. Run, Izuku! Live! That is your victory! Just live! A klaxon blared, signaling the midday meal break. The sound jolted Izuku back to the present. He was on his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The All Might figure was crushed to powder in his fist. He looked at his trembling hands. The cuff on his wrist felt like a brand. Live. Was this living? This hollowed-out existence? This constant, gnawing guilt that ate him from the inside out? He pushed the thoughts down. He buried them deep, back in the tomb where they belong. Thoughts were dangerous. Memories were poison. He was a ghost. Ghosts don't remember. He forced himself to his feet, dumped the plastic dust, and went back to work. Later that afternoon, while hauling a bin of sorted copper wire to a collection point, he saw it. It happened in the makeshift market square that had sprung up at the edge of the scrapyard, a place where workers bartered for small luxuries. A piece of fruit, a better grade of water, a patch for a worn-out jumpsuit. A woman had been caught trying to trade a small, hand-carved wooden bird for a packet of real coffee. Bartering with non-sanctioned goods was a level 1 infraction. The punishment was public. 2 wardens had her by the arms. She was pleading, her voice thin and reedy. "Please, it was for my son's birthday. It's just a toy." The lead warden, a hulking man whose quirk made his skin as tough and gray as granite, was unmoved. Unauthorized production and distribution of goods. The law is the law. It exists for your safety. His voice was amplified, metallic. It was the same tone as the morning broadcast, calm, reasonable, and utterly terrifying. He held up a hand. A slab of rock grew from his palm, forming a flat, heavy paddle. The crowd that had gathered flinched back. No one spoke. No one moved to intervene. They just watched, their faces blank masks of practiced indifference. To show sympathy was to mark yourself as a sympathizer. Izuku watched from the edge of the crowd, his card of copper forgotten. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, caged bird. The old fire, the righteous, heroic anger he thought had died 7 years ago, sparked in his gut. Do something. Help her. You have to help her. And then the cold, pragmatic voice of the survivor, the ghost, drowned it out. Look away. Turn around. Walk away. You are no one. If you act, you die. Everyone you know in the resistance, however small and scattered, could be compromised. You are too important to be thrown away on one person. His muscles locked. He was frozen, caught between the man he was and the boy he had been. The warden raised the rock paddle. The woman squeezed her eyes shut. The blow landed. Not on her, but on the small wooden bird he'd snatched from her. He shattered it on the ground, the pieces scattering like broken bones. This is a warning, the warden boomed. Next time, the punishment will be administered properly. Disperse. The crowd obeyed instantly, melting away. The woman sobbed, fell to her knees, and scrambled to pick up the splinters of her son's gift. Izuku finally forced his legs to move, turning his back and pushing his cart with a strength born of shame. He hated the wardens. He hated all for one. But in that moment, the person he hated most in the world was himself. The day ended as it began, with the voice of God. The time is 1800 hours. The workday is concluded. Return to your designated residences in an orderly fashion. The sanctuary is safe. The sanctuary is peaceful. Izuku was making his final run of the day, his route taking him through a cramped residential alley in one of the older, more dilapidated sectors. The sun was setting, painting the sky in sickly shades of orange and purple. Most people were already inside, the metal shutters on their windows drawn tight. This was the time of day when the shadows grew long and bold. He heard a cry. It was sharp, high-pitched, and filled with a terror that was achingly familiar. It was the sound of a child. Izuku froze, his hand tightening on the handle of his cart. He peered around the corner of a crumbling brick wall. Down the alley, a family, a mother, a father, and a small boy no older than 6, was pressed against the graffiti-covered wall. Cornering them were 2 wardens, their white armor gleaming in the twilight. Floating in the air around the little boy were a dozen or so rusty bolts, a discarded pipe wrench, and a hubcap, all wobbling unsteadily. The boy was crying, his hands held out, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. He wasn't controlling it. It was a first manifestation. A powerful one. The child is an unregistered quirk user, the first warden stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He held a device that was blinking red. Level 4 potential. Magnetokinetic. He must be taken for mandatory assessment and re-education. No, please. The mother begged, trying to shield her son. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just a boy. Don't take him. Your emotional outburst is counterproductive, the second warden said, taking a step forward. His hands began to glow, the same kinetic energy user from the morning patrol. Cooperation ensures a smoother process for everyone. The founder provides a place for children like this. A place where they can learn to control their gifts and use them for the good of the collective. Izuku knew what that meant. Re-education was a euphemism. Powerful, uncontrolled quirks were harvested. The children were taken to labs, their abilities studied, replicated, and then transferred to the Noma projects or to All for One himself. The children were never seen again. The father stood his ground, his body trembling but his voice firm. "You're not taking our son." The warden's head tilted. That was not a request. He lunged, and time slowed down for Izuku Midoriya. He saw the warden's glowing hand reaching for the child. He saw the mother scream, silent behind an invisible barrier of shock. He saw the father try to step in front, a futile, beautiful, heartbreaking gesture, and his mind fractured. Shigaraki's hand, reaching for Bakugo's face. Overhaul's hand, reaching for Eri. All Might's voice. "You too can be a hero." Nana Shimura's voice, a whisper from a place beyond time. "A hero's job is to meddle when they're not wanted." The first user's voice, a harsh, desperate rasp. "We were never meant to hide. We were meant to fight." The voices of the vestiges, silent for so long, erupted in his skull. They were a chorus of rage, sorrow, and unyielding defiance. The power of One for All, a dormant volcano, surged against the dam of his control. A phantom ache shot through his arms, his legs, a memory of power so vast it threatened to tear him apart. He could feel the lie of the cuff on his wrist, a flimsy piece of paper in a hurricane. He could end this in a second. A 5% smash would send these wardens flying. A flick of Black Whip would disarm them. He could save this family. He could be a hero, be small, be quiet, be invisible. The mantra of the survivor screamed back at him. If you use your quirk, they will know. The energy signature of One for All is unique. AFO will know. He will hunt you. He will find you. And this time, there will be no one left to save. The internal war was in agony. His body was locked in place, a statue of indecision. The wardens were almost upon the family. The father shoved the second warden back, a brave and foolish act that earned him a brutal blow to the stomach from the first warden's kinetically charged fist. He collapsed, gasping. The mother screamed. The boy shrieked, and the metal objects in the air rattled violently. Izuku's eyes, wild with panic, darted around the alley. He couldn't fight them. Not directly. But a distraction, a coincidence. His gaze landed on a rickety fire escape that clung to the side of the adjacent building. Piled high on its first-floor landing was a precarious stack of rusted ventilation ducts and sheet metal, waiting for haulers to collect. It was unstable. It overlooked the alley, right behind the wardens. The choice was made not by the hero or the survivor, but by some frantic hybrid of the two. He didn't move his body. He didn't even flinch. He just focused, calling on a sliver of power so minuscule it felt like a static charge. He channeled it to the tip of his finger, hidden in his glove, and aimed it not at the wardens, but at the base of the scrap pile. He remembered his training with All Might, the delicate control needed for long-range attacks. Air Force. He flicked his finger, an imperceptible movement inside his fist. A tiny, compressed pellet of air, no bigger than a marble and utterly invisible, shot across the alley. It struck the lowest, most corroded support strut of the fire escape, landing with a dull tink that was lost in the chaos. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the rusted strut buckled. The entire pile of scrap metal tilted, hesitated, and then came crashing down into the alley with a deafening, cacophonous roar of clanging, screeching metal. It didn't hit the wardens directly, but the avalanche of junk landed right behind them, blocking their path and kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. They spun around, disoriented, their armor deflecting a few stray pieces of sheet metal. What was that? Structural collapse? One shouted through the noise. In that moment of perfect confusion, the mother, seeing her chance, grabbed her husband's arm, hauled him to his feet, and scooped up her terrified son. She gave one panicked, uncomprehending look toward the chaos, and then she ran. She fled down the opposite end of the alley and disappeared into the labyrinthine streets. By the time the dust began to settle, they were gone. The two wardens stood amidst the wreckage, peering into the gloom. They're gone! Damn it! Report this. Unscheduled structural failure in Sector 9. We lost the targets. Izuku didn't wait to hear more. He was already moving. He didn't run. He forced himself into a steady, measured walk, turning the corner, pushing his cart, melting back into the deepening twilight. He kept his head down, his respirator on, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Be small. Be quiet. Be invisible. The mantra was a prayer now, a desperate plea. He walked block after block, his mind a maelstrom of terror and adrenaline. He hadn't been seen. He was sure of it. The use of power had been infinitesimal, a ghost of a whisper. It was probably fine. It had to be fine. But as he reached the street leading to his housing block, a cold dread trickled down his spine. He could feel it. A tingling sensation on his skin, a feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something more insidious. AFO's network. His city-wide surveillance system of energy sensors and quirk-sniffing detectors. Had his whisper been loud enough to be heard? He finally made it back to his room, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, his body trembling uncontrollably. He ripped the respirator from his face, sucking in the stale, recycled air. He looked at his hand, the one that had flicked the pellet of air. It was shaking. The cuff on his wrist, with its placid, lying red light, seemed to mock him. For 7 years, he had been a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life. He had survived by being nothing, by doing nothing. Tonight, in one impulsive, desperate moment, he had done something. He had saved a family. He had pushed back against the darkness, just a tiny, insignificant shove. But in a world made of glass, even the smallest stone can cause a crack. And Izuku Midoriya had the terrifying, sickening feeling that he had just thrown a stone, and the sound of the impact was about to echo across the entire, silent sanctuary. The ghost of Mizurufu may have just revealed himself, and the hunt was about to begin. The door to Izuku's apartment clicked shut, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the sudden, suffocating silence. He slumped against the cheap metal, the rough surface pressing into his back. His breath came in ragged, desperate heaves, each one a painful stitch in his side. The frantic drum of his heart was a wild animal thrashing against the cage of his ribs. He was a fool. A reckless, sentimental, unforgivable fool. His eyes darted around the tiny room, the familiar gray box now feeling like a trap about to spring. He saw the single window overlooking the alley, its grimy pane reflecting a distorted, terrified version of himself. He saw the flimsy lock on the door, a laughable deterrent against the forces he may have just summoned. He felt the phantom weight of 1,000 eyes upon him, the unseen sensors of the sanctuary's network zeroing in on his location, drawn by the single, impossible spark he had released into the world. It was small, he tried to reason with the panic clawing at his throat. So small. Just a whisper of power. A coincidental energy spike. They won't be able to trace it, but he knew it was a lie. He knew the nature of one for all. It was not a common quirk. It was a singularity, a bonfire of accumulated power that had burned for over a century. Even the smallest ember from that inferno would shine like a supernova in the meticulously curated darkness of all for one's world. The system wasn't designed to catch criminals. It was designed to catch threats. And there was no greater threat to the founder than the power that was, by all rights, supposed to be dead and buried. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He stumbled away from the door and lurched to the food prep station, fumbling with the faucet. He splashed the lukewarm, recycled water onto his face, the droplets tracing paths through the grime on his skin. He braced his hands on the edge of the sink, his knuckles white, and stared at his reflection in the small, cracked mirror above it. The face that stared back was a stranger's. It was the face of the ghost he had so carefully constructed. Gaunt, haunted, empty. But tonight, there was something else in those eyes. A flicker. A terrified, furious, brilliant green spark that hadn't been there an hour ago. It was the echo of the hero he had murdered 7 years ago, come back to haunt him. The quirk suppression cuff on his wrist felt like it was glowing hot, a band of molten slag searing his skin. It was a lie. A useless prop. And in his current state of panic, it felt less like a disguise and more like a homing beacon. He had to get it off. He had to feel the power, to know for sure what he had done, to gauge the size of the ripple he had sent through the pond. His fingers, slick with sweat and water, fumbled with the cuff's hidden clasp. It was a complex mechanism he'd practiced opening 1,000 times in the dark, a nervous tick he could perform by touch alone. But now his hands were shaking too violently. The clasp wouldn't give. A surge of claustrophobic terror seized him. It was stuck. He was trapped. No, he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. He clawed at it, his fingernails scraping against the hard polymer. Get off! Get off! With a cry of pure frustration, he slammed his wrist against the edge of the sink. Once. Twice. On the third impact, there was a sharp crack. The dummy cuff's casing fractured, and the mechanism finally gave way. The two halves of the band fell into the sink with a hollow clatter. The release was instantaneous and violent. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a dam break. 7 years of suppressed, dormant, coiled power erupted through him. It surged up his arm and detonated in his chest like a star-going nova. The single, dim light bulb in his ceiling flickered, buzzed, and then burst in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into near darkness. The floor beneath his feet vibrated, a low, powerful hum that rattled the cheap furniture. Green lightning, raw and untamed, crackled across his skin, arcing from his fingertips to the metal faucet, tracing frantic, beautiful, and terrifying patterns in the gloom. Izuku gasped, his lungs burning as if he just inhaled fire. The power was too much. It was a physical presence, a roaring ocean crammed into the shot glass of his body. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest, the sheer, overwhelming sensation of being one for all threatening to tear him apart from the inside out. And then the world fell away. He was no longer in his cramped apartment. He was standing on a plain of cracked, black earth under a bruised, churning sky shot through with veins of sickly green lightning. This was his mindscape, the realm of the vestiges. It had once been a place of ethereal light and shadow, but now it was a wasteland, a perfect reflection of his own broken spirit. The air was heavy, charged with ozone and despair. They were there, waiting for him. 8 figures standing in a loose circle. They were more defined than they had been in years, drawn out by the sudden surge of power. But they were not the council of wise mentors he remembered. They were solemn, weary ghosts, their forms flickering like dying flames. You fool, a voice boomed, sharp and angry. Daigoro Banjo, the 5th user, paced before him. The hero known as Lariat, once all boisterous energy and confident swagger, now looked frayed at the edges. His signature black jumpsuit seemed to absorb the dim light, and his face was a mask of pure exasperation. 7 years. Daigoro threw his hands up, his form wavering. 7 years of perfect silence, of perfect stillness. We were safe. You were safe. And you throw it all away for one family? What in the hell were you thinking, 9th? Before Izuku could form a response, a calmer, steadier voice cut in. He was thinking what any of us would have thought, 5th. He saw an injustice and he acted. Nana Shimura stood opposite Daigoro. Her presence was a small island of warmth in the desolate landscape. Her smile was gone, replaced by a profound sadness that seemed to weigh her down, but her eyes still held a spark of the fierce determination that had defined her. She looked at Izuku, not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful understanding. The impulse was pure, Izuku, she said, her voice a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. But the consequences. Daigoro is right to be concerned. You felt that surge. It was a cannon blast in a library. He will have heard it. He must have, hissed in, the 6th user, a shroud of black smoke coiling around his partially obscured form. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. Our one advantage was anonymity. It is now gone. Izuku finally found his voice, a weak, trembling whisper in the vast emptiness of the mindscape. I couldn't. The boy. They were going to take the boy. He looked down at his hands, which were translucent here, shimmering with green energy. I didn't even use a smash. It was just air. A flick of a finger. A flick of a finger powered by a god, a new voice rasped. It was a sound like grinding stones, ancient and brittle. The first user, Yoichi Shigaraki, stepped forward. He was the faintest of them all, a mere silhouette of a man, but his presence commanded an unnerving authority. The others fell silent as he approached. He radiated an aura not of heroism, but of pure, undiluted rebellion. He was the first spark, the genesis of their long, losing war. You call it a miscalculation, Yoichi said, his featureless head turning towards the other vestiges. I call it an inevitability. This power was not created to be hidden in a closet. It was not forged to rust in the soul of a frightened man. His gaze settled on Izuku, and though he had no eyes, Izuku felt pinned by his stare. It is a weapon. It was made to be aimed at my brother. You have spent 7 years polishing this weapon only to be terrified to pull the trigger. That's not fair. Nana interjected, stepping between them. He survived. He did what Tashinori asked of him. He lived. At the mention of the name, a collective wave of sorrow passed through the group. Izuku's gaze was drawn to the edge of the circle. There, almost completely transparent, was the form of All Might. He was a pale imitation of a ghost, a half-forgotten memory sketched in faint, golden light. He was in his skeletal form, his head bowed. He didn't speak. He just watched, his spectral face an unreadable portrait of pain and regret. Seeing him like this, so diminished, so powerless, hurt Izuku more than any reprimand. This faint echo was all that was left of the symbol of peace. Living is not the same as surviving, Yoichi countered, his voice sharp. He has been a ghost. A forgotten rumor. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, he was real. He acted. He resisted. That is the purpose of One for All. Not to be a symbol. Not anymore. There is no one left to inspire. Its only purpose now is to resist, and lead the monster right to our door. Daigoro shot back. The argument raged, the voices of the vestiges rising and falling around Izuku, a storm of conflicting ideologies. Recklessness versus necessity. Survival versus resistance. The past versus the future. He stood at the center of it, a lightning rod for their collective fear, anger, and desperation. He felt like a failure to all of them. A failure for hiding. A failure for acting. The weight of their 9 lives was a mountain on his shoulders. He closed his eyes, the churning sky and the arguing ghosts making his head spin. Please, he whispered, the sound barely audible. Stop. Slowly, the voices died down. The mindscape fell silent again, save for the low hum of the power that bound them all together. Nana Shimura drifted closer. Izuku, she said gently. What's done is done. We can't change it. You have to prepare. If you were her, they will be coming. What do I do? He asked, his voice breaking. The question of a lost child. It was the first user who answered, his voice devoid of all sympathy, leaving only cold, hard pragmatism. Run. The spire was a blade of perfect, polished black that stabbed the heart of the heavens. It was silent, sterile, and cold. There was no wasted space, no extraneous decoration. Every line, every surface, every shadow was designed for maximum efficiency and psychological dominance. Deep within its core, in a chamber known as the Nexus, the sanctuary was managed. The room was vast and circular, its walls a seamless tapestry of shimmering data streams and live surveillance feeds from every corner of the city. At the center of the room, on a raised dais, sat a single figure in a life-sustaining throne of chrome and medical machinery. Wires and tubes, thick as pythons, snaked from his body into the throne, which in turn was plugged directly into the city's central nervous system. This was his true form, unseen by the public, a broken, ruined creature, kept alive by science and spite. His face was a mass of scar tissue, his eyes long gone, but he saw more than any man alive. He was all for one. A legion of technicians in gray, featureless uniforms worked at consoles ringing the dais, their movements quiet and precise. They were little more than biological components in the larger machine. Report, all for one's voice, the same paternal baritone from the city's speakers but without the false warmth, echoed in the chamber. It was not broadcast. It was simply felt, a psychic pressure that made the technicians flinch. A woman, her face pale and drawn, stood up from her console. Sir. 1947 hours. An anomalous energy event was detected in Sector 9, residential quadrant. A section of the wall display zoomed in on a map of the city. A single point blinked with an angry, red light. Define anomalous. All for one commanded. The signature is unique, founder, the technician stammered, her fingers flying across her console. It does not match any registered quirk in the citizen database. The energy profile is chaotic, a high-density release with a particle decay signature I've never seen before. It registered for only 0.8 seconds. A ghost particle. All for one was silent for a long moment. The psychic pressure in the room intensified. The technicians held their breath. They knew his moods. They knew that his silence was more dangerous than any outburst. He had felt it. A flicker. An echo of a song he thought had been silenced forever. A faint, irritating dissonance in the perfect symphony of his control. It was the ghost of his brother's quirk, passed down like a genetic disease. The power he had failed to take from that muscle-bound fool, All Might. The power that the boy, the ninth user, had carried. He'd assumed the boy had perished in the aftermath of the final battle, another casualty of a war he had so decisively won. Apparently, he had been mistaken. How interesting, All for one murmured, a slow, terrible smile spreading across his scarred visage. A real smile, not the one he wore for the cameras. This one was full of predatory hunger, a little ember, still glowing in the ashes. He made a subtle gesture with a single, scarred finger. From the shadows at the edge of the dais, a figure detached itself and glided forward. He was a man named Kageyama, though few knew his name. They called him the Hunter. He was unnaturally tall and thin, his body wrapped in a tight-fitting, black uniform that seemed to drink the light. His skin was the color of bleached bone, and his eyes, wide and perpetually dilated, were a stark, piercing blue. They seemed to see things that weren't there. He moved with a liquid grace that was both silent and deeply unsettling, like a spider descending on its thread. Kageyama's quirk was as unique as it was terrifying, quirk resonance. He could feel the psychic and energetic echo left behind after a quirk was used. He could taste its flavor, follow its trail, and track its user across any distance, so long as the trail was fresh. He was All for One's most prized bloodhound. He bowed low before the throne, his posture one of reverent worship. "My lord," he breathed, his voice a sibilant whisper. "You have need of me. There is a rat hiding in my city, Hunter," All for One said, his voice laced with amusement. "A very old, very special rat. It has just squeaked. The echo must still be strong. I want you to find its nest." Kageyama looked up, his two blue eyes fixing on the blinking red dot on the map. A slow, deeply unpleasant smile spread across his pale face, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. He inhaled deeply, as if tasting the air. "I can feel it, my lord," he whispered, a tremor of eager anticipation in his voice. "It feels bright. Like a little sun. So much power, trying so hard to hide. Oh, this will be a delightful hunt. Find him," All for One commanded. "Do not engage. Do not alarm him. Just find him. I want to know where the last spark of hope in this world goes to sleep at night. Then, and only then, will we snuff it out. As you command, Founder." With another deep bow, the hunter turned and melted back into the shadows. He moved with a chilling purpose, a predator given leave to track his favorite prey. The technicians in the Nexus shuddered and returned to their work, pointedly ignoring the empty space where the man had been. They knew what the hunter's deployment meant. Someone, somewhere, was about to learn the true meaning of hopelessness. The mindscape shattered, and Izuku was back on the cold floor of his apartment, gasping for air. The green lightning had subsided, but the power still thrummed under his skin, a potent hum that made his teeth ache. The vestige's final word echoed in his mind. "Run." He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline and terror a potent cocktail in his veins. The argument was over. The choice was made. He had to disappear. He moved with a frantic, panicked efficiency. He pulled a worn, canvas go bag from its hiding place under his mattress. It was already half-packed, a testament to the paranoid reality of his life. He'd had this escape plan ready for years, a final, desperate contingency. Into the bag went the essentials. 2 tubes of nutrient paste. A small canteen with a built-in purification filter. A roll of bandages and a sterile suture kit. A worn, paper map of the old prefectures, marked with potential hideouts in the sprawling wilderness outside the sanctuary's walls. He shoved in a small, burner data pad, unregistered, untraceable, its battery almost dead. Finally, he grabbed a bundle of scavenged credits, his life's savings. It wasn't much, but it might buy him a ride out of the city from a black market hauler. He dressed quickly, pulling on his darkest clothes, his worn-out work boots. He was a creature of the night now, a fugitive. His mind raced, calculating routes, weighing options. The southern checkpoint was the least guarded after midnight. If he could get through the sewer access tunnels in Sector 12, he could emerge in the industrial wasteland and make a break for the perimeter fence. It was a long shot. A suicide run. But it was better than waiting here for the wardens, or something worse, to kick down his door. He slung the bag over his shoulder, the weight a grim comfort. He took one last look around the small, gray room that had been his prison for 7 years. There was nothing here to miss, no memories he wanted to keep. It was the tomb of Izuku Midoriya. He took a deep, steadying breath, his hand on the doorknob. He was ready. Knock. 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 The sound was sharp, solid, and impossibly loud against the thin metal of his door. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. It wasn't the sound a warden made. They didn't knock. They used battering rams. This was a human knock. Deliberate. Confident. Someone who knew he was in here. His heart hammered against his sternum, each beat a concussion. He backed away from the door, his eyes wide with primal fear. He grabbed the only thing in the room that could serve as a weapon, a heavy, metal pipe he used as a prop for his clothes line. He held it in a two-handed grip, his knuckles white, the cold metal a poor substitute for the power coiled in his limbs. Silence. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He held his breath, listening. He could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation, the distant wail of a patrol siren. Nothing else. Then a voice. It was muffled by the door, but it was clear. It was male, calm, and carried an undercurrent of extreme urgency. It was a voice he hadn't heard in 7 years, but one he would recognize in 1,000. Midoriya. It's me. Open the door. Izuku's mind went blank. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A trick. A trap. A psychological tactic from All for One, using the voice of a dead friend to lure him out. I know you're in there, the voice said again, a little louder this time, laced with impatience. We don't have time for this. Every second you wait, they're getting closer. They, against his better judgment, against every instinct for survival he had honed over 7 bitter years, a sliver of desperate hope wedged its way into his terror. He crept toward the door, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. The pipe felt heavy and useless in his hands. He peered through the door's peephole, his eye pressing against the scratched, fish-eye lens. The hallway was dimly lit, empty except for the man standing directly in front of his door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark, practical jacket with the collar turned up. His hair was cut short, military style. His posture was rigid, tense. His face was in shadow, but Izuku could see the grim, determined set of his jaw. It was a face he had seen every day in the UA dorms, a face that had once been full of earnest passion and rule-abiding righteousness. Now, it was the face of a hardened veteran, etched with lines of grief and exhaustion. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He lowered the pipe, his arm going slack with disbelief. He fumbled with the lock, his trembling fingers struggling with the simple mechanism. With a final, loud click, the door swung open a few inches. Tenya Ida stood before him. He looked broken. And reforged. The crisp, clean lines of the class president were gone, replaced by the hard edges of a survivor. A long, thin scar cut diagonally across his right eyebrow. The light in his eyes, once so bright with idealism, had been banked to a low, grim fire. But the most jarring change was his leg. His left leg, from the knee down, was gone. In its place was a crude, functional prosthetic. It wasn't one of May Hatsum's polished, high-tech babies. It was a thing of scavenged hydraulics, exposed wiring, and dull, unpainted metal. The magnificent engine that had once propelled Ingenium was gone, replaced by a constant, painful reminder of everything they had lost. Ida's gaze was intense, burning with an urgency that dwarfed Izuku's own panic. He didn't offer a greeting. There was no time for reunion. He thrust a small, ruggedized datapad into the space between them. On the screen was a schematic of Sector 9. A single, blinking red dot pulsed at the location of Izuku's apartment block. Superimposed over it was a complex waveform analysis, a chaotic scribble of green energy. The energy signature from the alley 40 minutes ago, Ida said, his voice a low, clipped rasp. It was faint, but it was unmistakable. Unique decay pattern. We've been monitoring the deep channel sensors for years, waiting for something, anything, that matched the old records. He looked up from the datapad, his eyes locking with Izuku's. There was no accusation in his gaze, only a grim, profound certainty. I knew it was you, Midoriya. The energy signature. It's a ghost I've been chasing for years. He took a half step back, his expression hardening. In the distance, the siren's wail changed pitch, growing closer, more insistent. They're coming, Ida stated, not as a possibility, but as a fact. A hunter is on the move. They've sealed the district. You can't run. You can't hide. Not on your own. He gestured with his head down the empty corridor. Your only chance is with me. Izuku stood frozen in the doorway, the go bag feeling impossibly heavy on his shoulder, the dead world of his apartment behind him, and the ghost of his best friend in front of him, offering an escape he never thought possible. The past and the future had just collided on his doorstep. Ida's final words were not a request. They were a command, delivered with the absolute authority of a man who had seen too much death to waste time on pleasantries. You have to come with me. Now. The word was a steel blade, cutting through the thick fog of Izuku's disbelief. There was no room for questions, no time for the reunion his heart so desperately and foolishly craved. The rising crescendo of sirens in the distance was the only explanation needed. The hunt was on. Tenya Ida didn't wait for a verbal response. He grabbed the strap of Izuku's go bag, his grip like iron, and hauled him out into the corridor. The door to Izuku's apartment slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing in the empty hall like a final closing of a tomb. This way, Ida commanded, his voice a low, urgent rasp. He turned and moved, not with the fluid, frictionless grace of the hero ingenium, but with a heavy, rhythmic, and shockingly fast gait. The crude prosthetic on his left leg whirred and clicked with each powerful stride, a percussive beat against the concrete floor. Clank thump. Clank thump. It was the sound of a man remade by war. Izuku stumbled after him, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and adrenaline. They weren't heading for the main exit. Ida led him down the hall in the opposite direction, towards a maintenance closet at the far end. The sirens were closer now, a multi-layered shriek that seemed to come from all directions at once. The entire district was being locked down. For him, Ida kicked open the closet door. It wasn't a closet. It was a gaping black maw, a service shaft dropping into darkness. A rusted iron ladder was bolted to the far wall. Go, Ida ordered, pushing Izuku toward the opening. Don't look down. Just move. Izuku hesitated for only a second before swinging his legs into the void. His boots found a rung, and he began to descend, the cold, corroded metal biting into his palms. The air that rose to meet him was thick and fetid, the foul breath of the city's underbelly. Ida followed right behind him, his prosthetic clanging against the rungs, the sounds unnervingly loud in the enclosed space. After what felt like an eternity of descent, his feet touched solid ground. It was slick with slime. They were in a wide, circular tunnel, a primary sewer main. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint, red glow from Ida's datapad. The stench was overwhelming, a putrid cocktail of waste and chemical runoff. They're not looking for a person, Ida explained, his voice low and tight as they began to move, wading through a shallow, sluggish stream of filth. They're looking for an energy signature. The hunter's quirk can taste the residue of your power. The trail will be strongest in your apartment, and the alley. The further we get, and the more we put between us and the surface, the harder it is for him to follow. As long as you don't use one for all, we're just shadows down here. Now keep up. Izuku nodded numbly, his throat too tight to speak. He focused on matching Ida's relentless pace, on not slipping on the treacherous ground. He watched the man ahead of him. This wasn't the Tenya Ida he knew. The old Ida had been a paragon of order, a devotee of rules and regulations. His movements, while precise, had always been formal, almost stiff. This new Ida moved with a grim, predatory efficiency, his head on a constant swivel, his body coiled with a tension that spoke of years spent in hostile territory. The boisterous class president who chopped the air with his hands had been buried, and a guerrilla soldier had crawled out of his grave. They navigated the labyrinthine tunnels for what felt like hours. Ida moved with an unnerving confidence, taking turns that seemed utterly random to Izuku but were clearly part of a well-rehearsed route. They moved from wide sewer mains to narrow, claustrophobic maintenance passages, their shoulders scraping against the damp brickwork. Twice, they froze as the thudding of warden patrols echoed from grates high above them, their flashlight beams cutting transient, terrifying slices through the darkness. Both times, Ida held up a hand, and they stood as still as statues, not even breathing until the sounds faded. Finally, they entered a section of tunnel that was different. The brickwork was older, more ornate. The air, while still stale, lost its chemical taint, replaced by the smell of damp earth and cold stone. Abandoned subway line, Ida muttered, shining his datapad's light on rusted tracks that disappeared into the gloom. Pre-Quirk era. Not on any of the sanctuary's official maps. They followed the tracks, their footsteps echoing in the vast, cavernous space. Izuku's legs ached. His lungs burned. The initial adrenaline rush had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing dread. He looked at Ida's back, at the steady, rhythmic clank thump of his prosthetic leg. He remembered the posters of the turbo hero, Ingenium, a knight in shining armor, a symbol of speed and rescue. The crude piece of machinery on Ida's leg was a brutal monument to how far they had all fallen. The guilt was a physical thing, a stone in his stomach. He had caused this. His reappearance, his one stupid, reckless act of heroism, had forced his old friend to risk everything. After another 20 minutes of walking, Ida stopped. He ran his hand along the curved tunnel wall, his fingers searching. He found a spot where the brick pattern was subtly different. He pressed 3 specific bricks in a sequence, and with a low groan of grinding stone, a section of the wall receded, revealing a dark, narrow passage. "We're here," Ida said, his voice holding the first hint of relief Izuku had heard all night. He gestured for Izuku to enter first. The passage was short, ending at a solid, reinforced steel door with a complex electronic keypad next to it. Ida keyed in a long, alphanumeric code. There was a series of loud clicks, and the heavy door hissed open on pneumatic hinges. The contrast was jarring. Izuku stepped from the cold, damp darkness of the tunnels into a space filled with warmth, low light, and the hum of electricity. They were in a vast, subterranean chamber. The ceiling was a chaotic web of exposed pipes, ventilation ducts, and thick bundles of cables held together with zip ties. The walls were a patchwork of ancient, foundational concrete and newer, hastily erected sheets of metal. The air smelled of ozone, hot solder, and the faint, coppery scent of human sweat. It was a bunker, a warren, a hive carved out of the very bones of the world they had lost. Scattered throughout the space were workstations overflowing with scavenged electronics, half-disassembled gadgets, and flickering monitors displaying scrolling lines of code. Cots were tucked into corners, each with a neatly folded blanket and a small footlooker. A makeshift kitchen area consisted of a hot plate and a water purifier humming away. It was a space of desperate, organized chaos. And then Izuku looked up, through a reinforced grating in the ceiling. Through the grime and years of neglect, he could just make out the shape of shattered marble pillars and the skeletal remains of a grand archway. His heart stopped. He knew that architecture. "Is this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "The foundations," Ida confirmed, his face grim. "Directly beneath the main courtyard of Yue High School. What's left of it, anyway? Welcome to the Undercroft." The name was fitting. It was a crypt, and they were the ghosts haunting it. Izuku felt a wave of vertigo. He was standing beneath the place where his dreams had been born, the place where he had first met All Might, where he had trained with his friends, where he had sworn to become the world's greatest hero. Now its ruins serve as the roof for a desperate, last-ditch hideout. The irony was so cruel it was physically painful. Before he could process the emotional blow, a voice cut through the low hum of the room. It was sharp, nervous, and crackling with static energy. Ida, you're back. The sensor tripwires you laid in Sector 9 went off like a string of firecrackers. What in the hell did you bring back with you? Izuku turned. Hunched over a sprawling console of interconnected monitors was a figure he barely recognized. The wild, electric blonde hair with its signature black lightning bolt was the same, but that's where the similarities ended. Genki Kaminari was thin, almost skeletal, his face pale and shadowed. Dark circles were bruised beneath his eyes, which darted nervously between his screens and the newcomers. The goofy, ever-present grin was gone, replaced by a permanent, anxious frown. He was wrapped in a nest of wires that snaked from his console and connected to various points on a harness he wore, allowing him to directly interface with and power their systems. He was no longer just a user of electricity, he was the central power station. Kaminari's eyes landed on Izuku, and they widened. Not with recognition, not with the joy of seeing a long-lost friend, but with raw, undiluted fear. No, Kaminari breathed, pushing his chair back. No, no, no. Ida, what did you do? His exclamation drew the attention of the other two occupants of the undercroft. From a corner workbench cluttered with tools, welding torches, and strange, spidery contraptions, a woman stood up, wiping her greasy hands on an oil-stained rag. May Hatsum's pink hair was tied back in a messy, grease-streaked bun, and safety goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. The manic, gleeful energy that had once propelled her to create her super-cute babies was gone, replaced by a hardened, laser-like focus. She looked at Izuku, her gaze analytical and cold, assessing him not as a person but as a threat variable. The energy spike, she said, her voice flat. It matched the archival data for OFA. I told you it was a 1 in a billion probability. She glared at Ida, her expression hardening. You brought a walking nuke into my workshop. Are you insane? My sensor shields are theoretical against a direct scan of that magnitude. We could all be dead in an hour. The third figure had been leaning against a shadowy pillar, almost invisible, until he chose to move. He pushed himself off the wall and stepped into the dim light. Hitoshi Shinso had changed the least and the most. He was taller, leaner, and the tired, cynical look he'd always had around his eyes had now consumed his entire face. It was a look that fit this broken world perfectly. His signature capture weapon was coiled neatly on his belt, and he moved with a silent, predatory grace. He was no longer a student trying to prove himself. He was a seasoned operative, a shadow who knew how to use the darkness. Shinso's lilac eyes swept over Izuku, his expression a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound disappointment. He let out a low, humorless chuckle. So the ghost finally decides to show himself, he said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. He took a slow step forward, circling Izuku like a wolf inspecting a wounded deer. I always wondered what happened to the symbol of Hope's chosen successor. Turns out he was hiding in a hole, just like the rest of us. His eyes flicked to Ida. You broke every protocol bringing him here. You put us all at risk for him. He gestured disdainfully at Izuku. Look at him. He's not a weapon. He's a walking catastrophe. He radiates guilt like a broken reactor. He's a liability. The three of them, Kaminari, Hatsum, and Shinso, formed a loose, hostile semicircle around Izuku. It wasn't a reunion. It was an interrogation. An accusation. In their eyes, he saw the reflection of his own deepest fears. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a long-lost comrade. He was the apocalypse, knocking at their door. He's right, Izuku heard himself say. The voice was small, hoarse, utterly broken. The weight of their combined animosity was a physical force, pressing down on him, and he didn't have the strength to fight it. He let the go-bag slip from his shoulder, and it hit the concrete floor with a heavy thud. He looked at the three faces he had once called his friends, and all he could feel was a bottomless well of shame. I'm sorry, he whispered, bowing his head. You shouldn't have found me. I never wanted to be found. The admission hung in the air, thick and heavy. It wasn't the defiance they expected. It was a surrender. Sorry isn't going to recalibrate my sensor shields when AFO's hunters come knocking. Hatsum snapped, jabbing a wrench in his direction. Do you have any idea how hard it is to mask the energy signature of a single fusion battery, let alone a living quark singularity? We're blind out there now, Kaminari added, his voice trembling as he gestured at his screens. I had to cut all our external relays the second I confirmed the signature. We're completely cut off. We don't know if they're coming, if they're already here. We're just waiting in the dark because of him. It was Ida who finally broke the circle of condemnation. He stepped between them and Izuku, his broad back a solid wall. The clank thump of his prosthetic was a sharp, authoritative sound in the tense silence. Enough, he said, his voice ringing with an authority that none of them could ignore. It was the voice of their leader. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the three of them. Yes, he was reckless. Yes, he broke 7 years of silence and put us at risk. And yes, Shinso, he is drowning in guilt. He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he turned his head slightly to look at Izuku. But you're all forgetting one crucial thing. His gaze moved back to the others, his expression diamond hard. For 7 years, what have we done? We've survived. We've hidden. We've scavenged. We've gathered information. We've run small, insignificant sabotage missions that are little more than annoyances to All for One's regime. We prick him with needles while he sits on a throne of our friends' bones. He took a step toward them, his presence filling the room. We have no heavy hitters. We have no one who can stand up to a Hien Nomu, let alone a Topter Warden. Our strategy has been to hide, to endure, to hope that somehow, someday, an opportunity might present itself. We have been playing a losing game of attrition, and we all know it. He pointed a thumb back at Izuku, who was still standing with his head bowed, looking like a prisoner awaiting his sentence. Ida declared, his voice resonating with a desperate, fiery conviction, is an opportunity. That power he carries, the power he is so terrified of, is the only thing on this planet that All for One is afraid of. It is the only weapon we have that can actually break something. He is not a liability. He is a goddamn sledgehammer in a world made of glass, and it's about time we decided to swing it. The room was silent again, but the nature of the silence had changed. The raw, accusatory anger had been replaced by a tense, grudging consideration. Ida's words had stripped away their fear and left only the cold, hard truth of their situation. They were losing. They had been losing for 7 years. Shinso was the first to break the silence. He hadn't moved, his arms still crossed, his expression still cynical. But his eyes were fixed on Izuku with a new, calculating intensity. A sledgehammer is useless if the person holding it is afraid to swing, he stated quietly. And even if he does, it draws attention. A lot of it. We're a scalpel, Ida. We're quiet. Surgical. He's a bomb. You can't perform surgery with a bomb. Maybe surgery isn't what we need anymore, Ida countered. Maybe it's time for some demolition. He sighed, the fight going out of him, replaced by a deep weariness. He turned to Izuku, his expression softening slightly. You're not a prisoner here, Midoriya. But you can't leave. The sanctuary is on lockdown, and out there alone, you're a dead man. For now you stay with us. You're our problem now. He gestured to a simple cot in the far corner, away from the sensitive equipment. Get some rest. We'll figure out what comes next when the sun comes up. Numbly, Izuku nodded. He picked up his go bag and walked to the cot, feeling the weight of their stares on his back. Kaminari was still looking at him with fear. Hatsum with angry frustration, and Shinso. Shinso was looking at him with a cold, analytical pity that was somehow the worst of all. He sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress. The cot was pushed up against the old foundational wall of Yae. He placed his hand on the cold, rough concrete. He could almost feel the ghosts of his past on the other side of the stone, the laughter in the dorms, the shouting on the training grounds, All Might's booming voice. A world of light and hope, now nothing but a ruin casting a long shadow over their subterranean prison. He looked at the faces of his friends, twisted and hardened by 7 years of a war he had survived by hiding from. Ida, the broken soldier. Kaminari, the frayed nerve. Hatsum, the grim pragmatist. Shinso, the jaded spy. They had been fighting all this time. And he had been running. The Undercroft was not a sanctuary. It was not a refuge. It was the forgotten front line of a war everyone else thought was over, and by stumbling into it, Izuku Midoriya, the ghost of a hero, had just re-enlisted. Whether he was their salvation or their final doom, no one, least of all him, could say. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, treacherous sea. Izuku didn't rest, he drowned. He was tossed on waves of fragmented memory, the roar of battle a constant thunder in his ears. He saw the sky over Kamino Ward, not the familiar blue of his childhood, but a bruised, violent purple, ripped asunder by flashes of red and black lightning. He saw the faces of his friends, not as the hardened survivors in the Undercroft, but as they were in their final moments, young, terrified, and defiant. He saw Shoto Todoroki, his face a mask of grim determination, erecting a colossal wall of ice, a glittering, desperate barrier against an army of Nomu. He watched as the wall exploded inward, a concussive blast of dark energy turning his friend's final masterpiece into a deadly shower of shrapnel. He saw Achiko Uraraka, her suit torn, using her zero gravity on a collapsing skyscraper, holding it aloft just long enough for a group of civilians to escape before a shadowy tendril, impossibly fast, lashed out from the chaos. He remembered her gasp, a sound swallowed by the din of war. The nightmare shifted, and he was standing before All for One. The villain was no longer the broken creature in a life support throne, but the terrifying titan from the final battle, his face a swirling vortex of stolen quirks, his presence a crushing weight on reality itself. And beside him, held aloft by black tendrils, was Katsuki Bakugo. Kaken wasn't fighting, he was limp, his eyes vacant, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. You see, Ninth, All for One's voice echoed, a chorus of stolen voices speaking as one. This is the flaw in your ideology. The flaw in all heroism. You try to save everyone. And in doing so you save no one. The villain's hand, pulsing with red-black energy, reached for Bakugo's chest. A symbol must be absolute. It cannot be shared. Let me show you. Izuku tried to scream, to move, to activate One for All, but his limbs were lead. He could only watch, helpless, as the red energy flared, as Bakugo's body convulsed, as a silent scream contorted his features before Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was staring at the rust-stained underbelly of a ventilation pipe. The air was cool and damp. The only sounds were the low hum of machinery and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the Undercroft's other occupants. He was safe. It was a dream. It was a memory. The line between the two had blurred into non-existence years ago. He sat up, his heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against his ribs. His jumpsuit was soaked in a cold sweat. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, trying to ground himself in the present, the Undercroft. The faces of his friends, aged and hardened by 7 years of unrelenting war. This was real. He swung his legs off the cot. The concrete floor was cold against his bare feet. The Undercroft was cast in a dim, pre-dawn gloom, lit only by the flickering screens of Kaminari's console. Denki himself was asleep in his chair, his head slumped onto his desk amidst a tangle of wires, a picture of pure exhaustion. Mei Hatsum was curled up on a pile of discarded industrial blankets near her workbench, one arm thrown protectively over a half-finished device that looked suspiciously like a high-yield plasma cutter. Only 2 figures were awake. In the center of the room, at a makeshift table littered with datapads and dog-eared paper maps, sat Tenya Ida and Hitoshi Shinso. They spoke in low, hushed tones, their faces illuminated by the pale blue light of a single datapad. They were planning. Always planning. Izuku stood up, feeling like an intruder in his own life. He needed water. He needed to wash the taste of nightmares from his mouth. He moved quietly towards the small kitchen area, trying not to disturb the fragile peace of the bunker. As he passed the central table, he couldn't help but overhear their conversation. The convoy route is predictable, but the security detail is variable, Ida was saying, his finger tracing a line on a digital map. They change the warden rotation every week to prevent ambushes. Our intel says the next transport from the Tartarus reclamation zone is in 3 days. They'll be moving critical supplies, processed quirk-suppressing agents, warden armor plating, and nutrient paste for the central districts. So we hit them, Shinso said, his voice a low drawl. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual cynicism, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Standard up. Cause a diversion. Kaminari fries their comms. You and I go in fast, grab what we can, and disappear before the QRF arrives. It's risky, but doable. I was thinking of a different objective, Ida said, his voice dropping even lower. The diversion. I want to hit the main food distribution hub in Sector 4. Shinso stiffened. The civilian hub? Ida, that's not a military target. It's a rationing station. Hitting it won't hurt AFO, it'll hurt the people who rely on it. We'll be creating a panic, a food shortage. The optics are terrible. The optics don't matter, Ida countered, his voice hard. What matters is the response. A direct attack on civilian infrastructure will force AFO to redeploy the elite warden units from the convoy to restore order. It'll pull the QRF away from our primary target. It will give us a wider window to secure the actual prize. The people in Sector 4 will go hungry for a day, maybe two. It's an acceptable loss. Izuku froze, his hand halfway to the water purifier. Acceptable loss. The phrase hit him like a physical blow. It was the cold, brutal calculus of war, a language he had never learned to speak. The hero in him, the boy who wanted to save everyone with a smile, recoiled in horror. You can't do that, Izuku said. The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. Both Ida and Shinso turned to look at him. Ida's expression was one of mild surprise, Shinso's was one of weary contempt. Stay out of this, Midoriya, Shinso said, not unkindly, but with the firm finality of a parent speaking to a child who had wandered into the adult's conversation. This doesn't concern you. It does! Izuku insisted, stepping forward, the old fire he thought long dead sparking in his chest. You're talking about starving civilians. Innocent people. How is that any different from what the villains do? We're supposed to be better than them. A humorless, pitying smile touched Shinso's lips. Better? There is no better anymore. There is only alive and dead. We do what we must to survive, to fight. We make hard choices so that maybe, one day, someone else won't have to. You've been hiding for 7 years. You don't get to lecture us on the cost of this war. He's right, Midoriya, Ida said, his voice softer but no less firm. He stood up, the full height of him casting a long shadow. Your idealism is a luxury we lost a long time ago. The people of Sector 4 are already starving under all-for-one's rationing. They live in fear every single day. A day of hunger and chaos is a bitter pill, I grant you, but it is better than a lifetime of slavery under his rule. Every action we take is weighed. We choose the option that causes the least amount of long-term harm to achieve the greatest strategic gain, but there has to be another way. Izuku pleaded, his voice rising with passion. A way to win without sacrificing the very people we're trying to protect. We can't become monsters to fight a monster. The argument was a flashpoint, a collision of two irreconcilable worlds. Izuku's world of black and white heroism, preserved in the amber of his self-imposed exile, crashed against the grim, gray reality that Ida and Shinso had been forced to inhabit. It was the symbol of peace versus the cold, hard logic of insurgency. Ida looked at him, and for a moment, Izuku saw a flash of the old Tenya Ida in his eyes, the boy who believed in rules, in order, in doing the right thing. He saw the flicker of conflict, the pain that these choices caused him. But it was just a flicker. The soldier extinguished it in an instant. There is no other way, Ida said, his voice flat and final, ending the argument. He turned back to the map, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went far beyond lack of sleep. Get some water, Midoriya. Training begins at 8 o'clock. Defeated, Izuku retreated. He filled a cup with water, the simple act feeling like a concession. He drank it down, the cool liquid doing nothing to quench the fire of outrage and shame in his gut. He had tried to stand for something, and they had looked at him like a relic, a fossil from a bygone age. Maybe they were right. His gaze drifted across the room, past the sleeping forms of Kaminari and Hatsum, and landed on a section of the wall near Ida's cot. It was a simple, stark memorial. A smooth sheet of salvaged metal had been bolted to the concrete. Scratched into its surface, in neat, precise lettering, was a list of names. The fallen, remembered. Izuku's feet carried him toward it, a morbid curiosity pulling him in. He already knew who he would find there. He had seen their deaths 1,000 times in his nightmares. But seeing it here, written in stark finality, was different. His eyes scanned the list. Toru Hagakure, Minoru Mineta, Rikido Sato, Yuga Oyama, Mashireo Ojiro, Koji Koda, the names of his classmates, one after another. Each one a fresh stab of guilt. He had been their friend. He had been the one with the ultimate power. And he had failed to save them. His eyes continued down the list, his breath catching in his throat. Mina Ishido, Tsuyu Ajiri, Fumikage Tokoyami, Kyoka Jiro, Eijiro Kirishima. Unbreakable. Shattered. Izuku remembered his smile, his fierce loyalty. Achiko Uraraka, Shoto Todoroki. He reached out, his fingers tracing the cold, sharp edges of their names. He could feel the weight of them, the ghost of their presence. Uraraka's bright, determined eyes. Todoroki's quiet, stoic strength. He had watched them fall. His gaze dropped to the final name on the list, separated from the others by a small, horizontal line, Katsuki Bikugo. And next to it, 2 words that made his blood run cold. Status unknown. Presumed deceased. Izuku stared at the words, his mind refusing to process them. Unknown. Not confirmed. He had seen the explosion. The blinding white light. The way Kaken had just vanished. In his mind, it had always been an absolute. Kaken was gone. Dead. Another failure to lay at his own feet. But unknown? It was a sliver of something that felt dangerously like hope. A cruel, impossible hope. Did it mean there was a chance? A 1 in a billion chance that somewhere, somehow, Kaken had survived? The thought was a fragile, beautiful, and terrifying thing. Hope, he was quickly learning, was the most dangerous contraband in this new world. He was the last one, a quiet voice said from behind him. Izuku turned. Shinso was standing there, holding 2 steaming mugs. He offered one to Izuku. It was a weak, bitter-smelling tea. Izuku took it, his fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. The final battle, Shinso continued, his eyes on the wall. After all might fell, after Todoroki and Uraraka, after most of us were either dead or out of the fight, Bikugo went after all for one himself. It wasn't strategy. It was pure, distilled rage. He overloaded his own quirk. The energy release was massive. It vaporized 3 city blocks. When the dust settled, All for One was wounded, forced to retreat into the shell of his life support. And Bikugo was gone. No body, no trace, not even a scorch mark. Just gone. Shinso took a sip of his tea. Most of us think he disintegrated. That he pushed his power so far it consumed him. Ida refuses to believe it. He says until there's a body, there's a chance. So he listed him as unknown. It's the one piece of irrational hope he allows himself. Izuku looked from the wall to Shinso's tired, cynical face. You don't believe it? Shinso gave a slight, humorless shrug. I believe in what I can see. And I saw an explosion that should have leveled a mountain. I don't believe anyone could survive that. Hope is a luxury, Midoriya, and it's expensive. I prefer to deal in facts. A profound, suffocating sadness settled over Izuku. The flicker of hope ignited by the word unknown was doused by the cold water of Shinso's pragmatism. He was right. It was a foolish, childish dream. Kaken was gone. They were all gone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the names, the weight of his failures pressing down on him until he felt like he would collapse. He saw his own name in his mind's eye, a ghost haunting the list of the dead. He had survived, yes. But at what cost? He had kept his promise to All Might. He had lived. But the boy who had made that promise, the boy who dreamed of being a hero, had died on that battlefield with all the others. The silence was broken by the quiet, overwhelming sound of a single sob. It took Izuku a moment to realize it was coming from him. A tear, hot and shameful, traced a path through the grime on his cheek and dripped onto the floor. It was the first tear he had shed in 7 years. He expected a cynical remark from Shinso. A command to pull himself together. Instead, the other man was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. It wasn't your fault, you know. Izuku looked up, startled. The war, Shinso clarified, his gaze still fixed on the memorial wall. We all made our choices. We all fought. We all lost. You carry one for all, so you carry the weight of the crown. But the blame? The blame belongs to one person, and one person only. And he's sitting in a tower in the middle of this city. He finished his tea and placed the empty mug on a nearby crate. Ida's right. Training in 10. Don't be late. He walked away, leaving Izuku alone with the ghosts of their friends and the unexpected, unsettling kindness of a cynic. Training was a brutal, humbling, and necessary awakening. The Undercroft had a small, designated training area, a section of the floor cleared of debris and covered with worn rubber mats. Ida insisted he start with the basics. Control. After 7 years of dormancy, One for All was a wild, untamed beast. The surge in his apartment had been raw power, but it was unfocused, dangerous. You're not a sledgehammer yet, Ida told him, his tone all business. Right now, you're an unstable bomb. We need to teach you how to be a precision instrument again. Show me 5%. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to remember the feeling. He reached for the power, not the roaring inferno from the night before, but a small, controlled flame. He focused, pushing it through his body, letting the familiar green lightning crackle around him. The power felt good. It felt like coming home. He threw a punch at the air. The motion felt fluid, powerful. He felt strong. Again, Ida commanded. But this time, your opponent is Hitoshi. Shinso stepped onto the mat, a bored expression on his face. He held his capture weapon loosely in one hand. This is ridiculous, Izuku said. I can't fight him at 5%. I'll hurt him. Shinso let out that low, humorless chuckle. Worry about yourself, symbol of hope. Go! Ida ordered. Izuku lunged, aiming a telegraph punch at Shinso's shoulder, pulling the blow to be non-lethal. He was fast, much faster than a normal human. But Shinso was faster. He didn't try to block. He didn't try to dodge. He simply took a half step back, and as Izuku's punch whistled past, he flicked his wrist. The capture weapon, a blur of white, shot out and wrapped itself around Izuku's ankle. Before Izuku could even register what had happened, Shinso yanked hard. Izuku's feet were pulled out from under him. He hit the mat with a loud, ignominious thwump, the air rushing from his lungs. In an instant, Shinso was on him, a knee pressed into his back, the capture weapon now looped tightly around his neck in a chokehold. The entire fight had lasted less than 3 seconds. You're sloppy, Shinso's voice was a low murmur in his ear. You broadcast every move. You rely on power, not technique. Your heroic instincts make you predictable. You pull your punches, you aim for non-vital areas. You fight like you're still trying to pass a provisional license exam. He released the hold and stood up, dusting himself off. Izuku lay on the mat, gasping for air, his face burning with humiliation. The villains you're fighting now aren't monologuing idiots looking for a dramatic showdown, Shinso said, his tone turning serious, losing its cynical edge. They aren't waiting for you to announce your special move. They're survivors. They're killers. They're soldiers in All for One's army. They will use every dirty trick, every cheap shot, every opening you give them to put you in the ground. You fight like you did, you'll be dead before you can even say smash. He kicked Izuku's foot lightly. Again. The next hour was a litany of failures. Izuku tried to use his speed, but Shinso used the terrain, the cramped confines of the Undercroft, to his advantage, forcing Izuku into corners. He tried to use air force, but Shinso anticipated it, using the capture weapon to change Izuku's trajectory at the last second. He was outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought at every turn. He was a god of power being systematically dismantled by a master of technique and psychology. It was infuriating. It was humbling. And it was exactly what he needed. By the end of the session, Izuku was bruised, exhausted, and covered in sweat, but something had shifted in him. The rust was beginning to flake away. The fog of 7 years of inactivity was starting to clear. Shinso's brutal lessons were stripping away the naive hero and forcing the soldier underneath to emerge. He was finally learning the language of this new war. And its first, most important lesson was that power meant nothing without control, and heroism meant nothing without the will to be ruthless. The weight of the symbol he once aspired to be was crushing him. To survive, to fight, he would have to build a new symbol from the ashes of the old one forged not of hope and smiles, but of grim resolve and hard-won victories. And the Undercroft, this tomb of heroes, was to be his forge. 2 days. It had been 2 days since Izuku had been swallowed by the Undercroft, and the passage of time had taken on a strange, subterranean quality. There was no sun, no moon, only the artificial cycle of the bunker's humming lights, dimmed for night and brightened for day. Izuku's world had shrunk to this concrete tomb, a place of recycled air, endless training, and the constant, low-grade tension of a gorilla cell living on a razor's edge. The brutal training sessions with Shinso had become a daily ritual of humiliation and education. Izuku was slowly, painfully, recalibrating. He was learning to quiet the heroic instincts that screamed at him to be gentle, to hold back. Shinso was teaching him a new kind of fight, one of efficiency, economy of motion, and brutal pragmatism. Don't disable, incapacitate, Shinso would drone after wrapping his capture weapon around Izuku's throat for the 10th time. Don't warn, strike. In the half-second you waste on a heroic monologue, they've already put a blade through your lung. When he wasn't being systematically dismantled by Shinso, he was with Hatsum. She treated him less like a person and more like a volatile, fascinating piece of hardware. She had him run on a massive treadmill-like dynamo of her own creation, forcing him to generate controlled bursts of one for all to power her diagnostics. Wires and sensors were attached to his body, and she would watch her monitors with a terrifyingly manic glee as the energy waveforms scrolled across the screen. Fascinating, she'd mutter, her goggles reflecting the green light of his power. The energy output isn't linear. It's quantic, folding in on itself. No wonder it's so hard to track. It's not just a battery, it's a pocket dimension of pure kinetic potential. A very, very leaky one, mind you. Through these sessions, Izuku learned more about the practical nature of his quirk than ever before. He learned how to suppress its aura, to bank the fire of OFA so it was a pilot light instead of a bonfire, making him harder to detect. He learned that the multiple quirks of the previous users, which had once felt like separate tools, were now more deeply integrated, threads in the larger tapestry of the power. It was no longer just one for all. It was his one for all. Despite the progress, he was still an outsider. A ghost haunting their well-oiled machine. Kaminari still flinched whenever Izuku powered up, his own electricity-based quirk, making him painfully sensitive to the raw output of OFA. Shinso remained a wall of cynical detachment, and Hatsum's interest in him was purely scientific. Only Ida treated him with a semblance of their old camaraderie, but even that was buried under the immense weight of his new role as their commander. The easy friendship they once shared was another casualty of the war. On the 3rd day, the routine shattered. It's a go, Ida announced, his voice cutting through the morning quiet of the Undercroft. He stood before the central map table, where the others had already gathered. Izuku, just finished with his morning sparring session with Shinso, wiped sweat from his brow and joined the circle. On the main monitor, Kaminari had pulled up a satellite feed, a grainy, black and white image, likely pirated from one of AFO's own surveillance systems. It showed a convoy of 3 heavy, armored transport trucks moving along a desolate stretch of elevated highway on the city's outskirts. The transport from the Tartarus reclamation zone is on schedule, Ida explained, his tone all business. But our intel was updated overnight. This isn't a standard supply run. He zoomed in on the lead truck. Hatsum's new long-range scanners picked up a biosignature in the primary transport. A strong one. It's a prisoner. A live one. And based on the level of security, 4 Warden escort vehicles, 2 aerial drones, it's someone important. Kaminari typed a command, and a dossier file appeared on a secondary screen. It showed the face of a man in his late 30s, with a severe expression and a distinctive scar over his left eye. Izuku recognized him instantly. Rock Lock. The pro-hero, Ken Takagi, Ida confirmed. Quirk, lockdown. The ability to fix an object's position in space. He was captured during the fall of Fukuoka, presumed executed. He was one of the best intelligence and infiltration heroes we had. If he's alive, The information in his head could be a game-changer. He would know about AFO's black sites, his command structure, things we can only guess at. A new, dangerous energy filled the room. This wasn't a simple supply raid anymore. This was a rescue mission. A real, tangible act of rebellion that went beyond mere sabotage. It was a chance to bring a hero back from the dead. The objective has changed, Ida stated, his gaze sweeping over each of them. We're not just hitting the convo. We're getting him out. He laid out the plan. It was audacious, complex, and had a dozen points of failure. Shinso and Ida would form the primary assault team, using a targeted EMP blast from one of Hatsum's babies to disable the lead escort vehicle and create a roadblock. Kaminari, operating remotely from the Undercroft, would hack and disable the aerial drones and jam their communications the moment the EMP went off. And me? Izuku asked, his heart beginning to beat faster. Ida's gaze settled on him. It was a heavy, measuring look. You're the hammer, he said, echoing his own words from 2 nights prior. The moment the convoy is stopped, the wardens will form a defensive perimeter around the prisoner transport. They'll be expecting a small, fast insertion team. They won't be expecting you. He pointed to a spot on the map, an overpass directly above the planned ambush site. You'll be positioned here. When I give the signal, you drop down and you break their line. You are the chaos. You are the overwhelming force they can't account for. Your job is not to be subtle. Your job is to draw every ounce of their attention, to hit them so hard and so fast they don't have time to call for reinforcements before we've got rock lock and are gone. Izuku's mouth went dry. This was it. His first real mission. The first time he would willingly, intentionally unleash one for all against the forces of his enemy. The terrified ghost and the burgeoning soldier within him were at war. What's the extraction plan? Shinso asked, ever the pragmatist. That's the weak point, Ida admitted, his expression grim. The ambush site is near the Sector 7 market district. It's densely populated. Once we have Takagi, we'll have to melt into the crowds. It's our only cover. That's a lot of civilians to put in the crossfire, Shinso noted, his eyes flicking to Izuku. Izuku's stomach clenched. He thought of the family in the alley. He thought of his argument with Ida about acceptable losses. He was being asked to be the storm, and a storm didn't care what, or who, was in its path. We move with precision. We minimize collateral damage wherever possible, Ida said firmly, his eyes boring into Izuku. But the mission comes first. Getting Takagi is paramount. Is that understood? Izuku looked around the room. He saw the grim determination on Ida's face, the nervous energy radiating from Kaminari, the cold focus in Shinso's eyes, the fierce intensity in Hatsum's. They were soldiers. They had accepted the costs. If he was to be one of them, he had to as well. He straightened up, pushing down the knot of fear in his gut. He met Ida's gaze and gave a single, firm nod. Understood. The world outside the Undercroft was a shock to the system. After 3 days in the sterile, recycled air of the bunker, the smog-choked, cacophonous reality of the sanctuary was an assault on the senses. Izuku, Ida, and Shinso moved through the dilapidated underlevels of the city, using the same hidden routes they'd taken before. Izuku was clad in a dark, hooded jacket and simple pants, the closest thing they had to tactical gear for him. His face was obscured by a respirator mask, making him just another faceless citizen. But under the drab clothing, he felt the thrum of one for all, a caged beast waiting to be unleashed. They emerged from a sewer grate into a grimy alleyway, the sounds of the Sector 7 market washing over them. It was a chaotic, sprawling bazaar where the city's underclass bartered and traded for scraps. The air was thick with the smell of cheap street food, unwashed bodies, and despair. It was the perfect place to disappear. Ida checked the time on his datapad. We're in position. Kaminari status report. I'm in their heads. Kaminari's voice crackled in the tiny, bone conduction earpiece they each wore. Got a clean feed from the drones. Convoy is 5 minutes from the ambush point. The EMP is primed. Ready on your mark, Ida. Hatsum? My baby is armed and ready to pop, May's voice chirped, a little too cheerfully. Don't scratch the casing, Tenya. It's a prototype, Midoriya, Ida said, turning to him. Your position is the overpass, 200 meters north. Get there now. Do not engage until you hear my signal. The signal is thunder. Izuku nodded, his heart pounding. Got it. And Midoriya, Ida added, his voice dropping, his gaze intense. Control. Remember your training. You are a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Not yet. Izuku understood the unspoken message. Don't be a hero. Be a soldier. He separated from them, melting into the throng of people in the market. He kept his head down, his hands in his pockets, just another wraith drifting through the ruins. He moved with a purpose that felt alien to him, the ghost he had been for 7 years shedding his skin. As he passed through the crowds, he saw the faces, gaunt, tired, hopeless. These were the people he was supposed to be saving, the people whose lives he was about to throw into chaos. Ida's words echoed in his mind. An acceptable loss. The phrase tasted like ash. He reached the access ladder to the overpass and climbed, emerging onto a narrow walkway overlooking the elevated highway. Below him, the multi-lane road curved through the city. He could see the designated ambush point, a slight bend in the road. He crouched behind a concrete barrier, his perch giving him a perfect view. He was a predator, waiting for his prey. The feeling was deeply unsettling. He didn't have to wait long. He saw them first as distant specks, then as a brutal procession of dark metal. 3 hulking, 6-wheeled armored trucks, flanked by 4 smaller, faster Warden patrol vehicles. 2 sleek black drones hovered above them like birds of prey. It was an intimidating show of force. His earpiece crackled. Convoy entering the zone, Kaminari reported, his voice tight with tension. 30 seconds to optimal position. Izuku took a deep breath, reaching for his power. He didn't let it flare. He gathered it, a small, dense core of energy in his chest, following Hatsume's instructions to minimize its signature. He could feel the familiar, comforting warmth spread through his limbs. 10 seconds, Kaminari counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Mark. From a side street below, a small, disc-like object shot out and attached itself to the lead Warden vehicle with a magnetic thunk. A split second later, it erupted in a silent, invisible pulse of energy. The Warden vehicle's lights died. Its engine sputtered and went silent. It coasted to a halt, blocking the lead lane. Simultaneously, the 2 drones above the convoy wobbled, their engines cutting out. They dropped from the sky like stones, crashing onto the empty lanes behind the convoy with a screech of tortured metal. EMP hit. Drones are down. Comms are jammed, Kaminari said triumphantly. You have a 90-second window before their hardline backup systems reboot. The convoy screeched to a halt. Wardens, 8 of them in total, poured out of the remaining vehicles, their weapons raised, forming a defensive circle around the central transport truck. They were disciplined, professional. They moved with the cold efficiency of a well-drilled fire team. From his perch, Izuku saw Ida and Shinso emerge from an alley, moving low and fast. But the plan was already going wrong. There were more of them than expected. Not 8 wardens. 10. 2 more had been inside the main truck. And their leader was a cut above the rest. He was a mountain of a man, clad in heavier, more ornate armor, his helmet sporting a crimson stripe. He held a massive, rifle-like weapon that hummed with energy. Sub-commander level, Ida's voice was a curse in Izuku's ear. Intel was wrong. They're better armed than we thought. We're pinned down. Izuku watched as Shinso and Ida were forced to take cover behind a derelict bus stop, a hail of plasma bolts peppering their position. They were trapped. The 90-second window was evaporating. The sub-commander barked an order. Secure the asset? 2 of you, sweep the lower levels. Flush them out. The rest of you, suppressive fire. 2 wardens broke from the formation, heading for the access ramp that led down into the market district. If they got down there, they would have a clear line of fire on Ida and Shinso's flank. They're flanking us. Ida yelled. We can't hold this position. Midoriya, we need that diversion. Now. Signal is thunder. This was it. Izuku stood up, peering over the edge of the concrete barrier. Below him, the wardens were a knot of black and white armor, their attention split between Ida's position and the 2 flankers. His target was the main group. He had to hit them hard enough to break their formation and draw their fire, giving Ida and Shinso the opening they needed. He took a deep breath. Remember your training. Control. He crouched, gathering one for all into his legs. Not 100%. Not even 20%. A controlled, precise 8%. He leaped over the barrier, a silent, green-tinged shadow falling from the sky. He aimed for the empty pavement in the center of their formation. He was a living projectile, a meteor of controlled power. The wind roared in his ears. The world narrowed to his target. He hit the ground in a perfect three-point landing, the asphalt cracking and shattering under the force of his impact. Delaware smash, Air Force. He clapped his hands together, releasing a compressed cannonball of air pressure. It wasn't a destructive blast. It was a concussive wave, designed to disorient, to throw them off balance. The effect was instantaneous. The wardens were thrown back, stumbling, their formation breaking. The sheer shock of his sudden appearance, a man literally falling from the sky, created a precious second of stunned confusion. What the hell? One of them yelled. Where did he come from? It's the energy signature. The sub-commander roared, recovering first. It's him. All units, focus fire on the new target. Kill him. Izuku didn't wait. He moved, a blur of green lightning. He flowed between them, Shinso's lessons echoing in his mind. Don't disable, incapacitate. He struck the first warden with a precise chop to the back of the neck. The man crumpled. He disarmed the second with a kick to the wrist, followed by a sweep that took his legs out from under him. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, his movements fluid, economical. He wasn't the brawling, smashing hero of his youth. He was a weapon, but as he moved to engage the third warden, something happened that his training hadn't prepared him for. From the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of movement. A civilian, a young woman, no older than 20, had been hiding behind a burnout car on the edge of the highway. Panicked by the fighting, she chose that exact moment to make a run for it, right through the middle of the battlefield. The sub-commander saw her too. He saw her, and he saw his opportunity. He grinned, a cruel, predatory expression visible even behind his helmet's visor. He leveled his massive plasma rifle, not at Izuku, but at the fleeing girl. Let's see you save this one, hero. He snarled. Time slowed to a crawl. Izuku was faced with an impossible choice. His primary target was the sub-commander. Taking him out was the key to breaking their command structure and freeing up Ida. But the girl, she was defenseless. She was going to die. The hero and the soldier screamed at each other in his soul. The mission comes first. Ida's voice. You can't save everyone. Shinso's voice. You have to try. All Might's voice. In the end, it wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. With a desperate cry, Izuku abandoned his attack. He changed direction in mid-stride, using FA gene to give himself an explosive burst of speed. He threw himself in front of the girl, a human shield, just as the sub-commander fired. A bolt of searing, white-hot plasma slammed into his side. The pain was unimaginable. It was a white-hot, blinding agony that eclipsed everything else. It wasn't like a punch or a cut. It was like being simultaneously burned, electrocuted, and torn apart. His borrowed jacket vaporized instantly. He felt the heat sear through his skin and muscle, charring him to the bone. The force of the impact threw him and the girl to the ground. He landed hard, his vision swimming, his side a universe of pure pain. Midoriya! Ida's voice was a frantic scream in his ear. Status. Report. Izuku couldn't answer. He was trying to breathe, trying to push past the agony. He looked at the girl. She was pale, terrified, but unharmed. He had saved her. He had also completely, utterly, catastrophically compromised the mission. He was down. The element of surprise was gone. He was injured, and the sub-commander was laughing, leveling his weapon for a finishing shot. So predictable, the commander sneered. You heroes and your pathetic sentimentality. But the commander had made a mistake. He had focused so entirely on Izuku that he had forgotten about the other two. A blur of silver and blue shot out from the bus stop. Ida. He had activated his remaining engine, his prosthetic leg pumping furiously. He wasn't as fast as he used to be, but he was still a blur to a normal man. He slammed into the sub-commander with the force of a freight train, his armored shoulder connecting with the man's chest. The commander went flying, his rifle clattering to the pavement. At the same time, Shinso rose from cover, his capture weapon lashing out. It wasn't aimed at a person. It wrapped around the heavy door of the prisoner transport truck. With a powerful heave, he ripped the door clean off its hinges. Rock lock. Now! Shinso yelled. Inside, Ken Takagi, looking gaunt and haggard but with a fire still burning in his eyes, used the last of his strength to activate his quirk. He slapped his hand on the floor of the truck. Locked down. The truck, and everything within 10 feet of it, was suddenly frozen in space, an immovable, indestructible object. The remaining wardens, who had been turning their weapons on the newly arrived Ida, found themselves unable to move, their feet locked to the ground. It was a brilliant, desperate gambit. Ida didn't hesitate. He grabbed the dazed sub-commander's plasma rifle, scooped up the injured rock lock, and threw the hero over his shoulder. Shinso! Grab Midoriya! We're leaving! Shinso was already there, hauling Izuku to his feet. The pain in Izuku's side was a roaring inferno. Can you walk? Shinso grunted, his arm looped under Izuku's shoulder. I think so, Izuku gasped, his vision tunneling. Then walk, Shinso ordered. Kaminari, we need a way out. Now, there's chaos in the market. Kaminari's panicked voice replied. The sound of the fight has them stampeding. But AFO is rerouting patrols your way. You've got 60 seconds tops. Shinso, the blackout, Ida commanded, his voice grim. Izuku's head snapped up, his pain momentarily forgotten. The blackout. The plan to cut power to the entire district, to cause panic and use the chaos as cover. The plan he had argued so vehemently against. No, Ida, don't. He pleaded. We have no choice. Ida shot back, his face a mask of grim necessity. It's this or we all die here. Kaminari, do it. Copy that, Kaminari said, his voice filled with reluctance. Blackout initiated. God help us all. A split second later, the world went dark. The lights of the market, the street lights, the glowing advertisements, everything winked out of existence. The only light came from the fires starting on the highway and the faint glow of Ida's data pad. The reaction from the market below was immediate and terrifying. The murmur of the crowd turned into a wave of screams. Panic. Fear. The sound of a stampede. Go! Ida roared. They plunged down the access ramp and into the heart of the chaos. It was a nightmare. A surging, screaming river of humanity. People were pushing, shoving, falling. Izuku, leaning heavily on Shinso, his side a blaze of agony, was swept up in the current. He could hear children crying, people shouting for their loved ones. This was his fault. He had done this. To save one girl, he had endangered thousands. They were no longer heroes. They were the cause of the disaster, using the terror of the innocent as their shield. They pushed through the crowd, Ida leading the way, a brutal wedge clearing a path, the unconscious form of Rock Lock slung over his shoulder. Izuku stumbled, his vision going black at the edges. The pain was too much. He was going to pass out. He was a liability. He was going to get them all killed. Don't you dare, Shinso snarled in his ear, his grip tightening, practically holding him upright. You made this mess with your hero complex. The least you can do is walk out of it. The harsh words were a slap in the face, a bucket of ice water that cut through the pain. Shinso was right. This was on him. He gritted his teeth, pushed the pain down into a small, dark corner of his mind, and forced his legs to move. One step. Then another. They were almost through the thickest part of the crowd. He could see the entrance to an alley ahead, their designated escape route. As they finally broke free from the human tide and plunged into the darkness of the alley, Izuku couldn't block out the sounds behind him. The screams. The crying. The desperate, terrified sounds of the people he had once sworn to protect. It was a sound that would haunt him far more than any nightmare of the war. It was the sound of his own failure, not as a soldier, but as a hero. He had made his choice on that highway, and now, in the darkness, surrounded by the chaos he had helped create, he was forced to live with the consequences.